Well, we're sitting with Nebraska's favorite son, Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska. Now,
Yes,
I was looking at your life trajectory, and it literally is going up and to the right. Grew up in a town of 26,000 in Nebraska. Summer labor in corn and bean fields. Valedictorian at the public high school. Harvard University graduate. 2 masters, 1 doctorate from Yale. Corporate turnaround specialist, McKinsey, leadership of the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, president of Midland University, the future leader of the universe. I mean, this is amazing. And then I look, and your birth date would say, there's no way. How can all of this be accomplished in such a short amount of time?
My mom says I'm intellectually schizophrenic and can't keep a job. So I like crisis. I mean, Max Weber has this distinction between bureaucratic management and entrepreneurial management. Bureaucratic management is really important to stabilize and steward an institution. It's not really my skill set. Patience is both a virtue and a vice, I think. And with a lot of broken stuff in the world, I tend to have skills that are a little more aligned with the entrepreneurial moment, stuff being built or growing really fast or going through disruption or maybe going out of business. And I just happened providentially to graduate college in 1994 when the internet was disrupting every sector of the economy. So I've spent a lot of my 23 adult years going into organizations or sectors or industries that were just right then exploding or falling apart. And I've done a lot of turnaround stuff. So I've had a lot of 3 and 6 and 9 month callings in my life to go be interim leader of this, that, or the other thing.
Well, the people I've talked to have said you tend to vacuum up a tremendous amount of information. You just pull in information and are able to retain it. Do you have a photographic memory? Or
No, I think one of the gifts I have is just I don't have a lot of insecurity about admitting what I don't know. I don't mind looking dumb, and so I ask a lot of questions. And so one of the things that I'm pretty decent at is if you're going into a company or a not-for-profit organization or an industry or some new calling and you don't know what you're doing, you don't have to pretend that you know what you're doing. You just got here, and you can ask a lot of questions. And I read a lot, but I also interview people a lot. I request briefings, and when I'm learning from people, I'll say, right now I'm doing a lot in national security and intel space, and so I bring generals and super spies into the SCIF or the classified bunker where we get intelligence briefings, and I bring people in and I start interrogating them and asking them questions, but about 10 minutes into my questioning of them as I'm trying to learn, I say, oh, by the way, this is your domain. This is your space. You know this stuff. I don't. What questions should I be asking that I'm not asking? You see what I'm driving at? But let's not let this be a game of Battleship where I'm just missing by a little bit with every question. Tell me what I should know. What are you losing sleep about? What do you think 10 years from now we're going to wish we'd invested a lot more in than we're investing in right now? And so I learned a lot.
Naturally curious as a kid, or was this you had some mentors that were saying, dig, you got to go a little bit deeper. That wasn't a good question. Find a way.
Yeah, my dad was a football and wrestling coach and high school teacher, and we didn't have a lot of money, sort of lower middle class family when I was growing up, and yet we liked to travel a lot because we were sports addicted. In Nebraska, football is the second most important religion. So we would travel.
I thought it was the first. But
sometimes there is an idolatry about the Huskers. By the way, we are the winningest team of the last 50 years in college football, but that's because we were really great from 50 until 32 years ago. We've had a bumpy 21st century.
I went to the University of Kansas and sat next to many of the players that felt like they had just hit a protein. So
right.
Feeling well.
So we traveled for the Huskers, and we traveled for high school sports, and my dad was coaching and reffing, and my grandpa, who never went to college, ended up being the business manager at a college that I would, 20, 30, 40 years later be president of, 30 to 40 years later, I guess. And at that school at that time, the athletic department reported to the business manager. And so my grandpa had responsibilities that were sort of a little bit like an athletic director as well. And I'd ride in the back seat of their car to away sporting events for small colleges all the time. And so lots of local travel creates empathy and curiosity. And hey, the world looks a little different here than there. Why do they do it this way? Why do we do it that way?
But you went from, speaking of kind of a major jump, from Midland University president to public office. What was the draw for you there?
I am definitely an outlier among politicians, a label that doesn't sit all that comfortably with me. Out of 100 people in the U.S. Senate, I think 95 have had public office in some capacity before they were a senator. I'm one of 5 people who's never run for anything. Politics is not the center of my life, and it wasn't my dream calling. So I'm a newbie in the political space. And I ran partly because there's lots of sort of prudential moments that just happened when I was in my fourth year. I was a college president for 5 years, and I guess with a year and a half to go in my college presidency run, I had led a turnaround at this 130-year-old liberal arts college, and we were pretty successful. And so the alumni network believed that I had built a good team and been a part of a strategy that really helped an important old institution. So there was kind of a built-in network. But really, I ran philosophically because I have a one cheer for politics view of the world. I think politics is important. You need to maintain a framework for ordered liberty, but politics is not the be all and end all. Politics is not the center of life. Politics is about power and compulsion, and life is about love and neighborliness. And so I think there's a freedom from, a freedom to distinction. And most of the really important stuff in life is the things you want to be free to do, the things you want to build, the people you want to assemble with, the sort of passions you have. You want to persuade people to join your venture philanthropy project, or to buy your new mouse trap, or the people you want to marry you, or the way you want to build your neighborhood. Those are the really important things in life. Politics is a means to that. It's freedom from a bunch of bad stuff so that you can do this. And I saw the race for Senate in Nebraska. I was elected 2.5 years ago. I saw the race unfolding about 4 years ago in a way where the Republican in my state, in the 6th year of a two-term Democratic president, a Republican was going to win that Senate seat. And so the primary was really the race. And there were a whole bunch of good candidates, strong candidates, people who were going to be able to raise a lot of money, people who could have done the job well. But it looked to me like the race was going to be predictable rhetoric of sort of good versus evil about politics. And I don't think politics is that important. And so I kind of wanted to have the job to displace people who would have a 3 cheers for politics view of the world.
No, that just even talking about love and community, that doesn't sound like something I would hear. If someone's whole goal was to become a lifelong politician, I don't get
not
the
my
sense
goal.
that is okay.
Yeah, I told Nebraskans my primary election night and my general election night, I made a speech where I very clearly said to the Nebraska people, you're voting for me, and you're my bosses, and I have a duty to you. I have a sort of Burkean theory of what the job is to be in representative government. I don't think it's to stick your finger in the wind and try to take polls about every issue on the short term. Right. As a delegate, I think you have a trustee responsibility to offer your judgment and your hopefully learned wisdom about the issues before you. But I'm not going to seek short-term popularity, and I'm fine to not do this calling anymore. I do turnaround stuff, and now I'm taking on a 6-year calling. I told them on election night, that seems like a really long time. I don't have a problem with commitment to my wife, but a 6-year commitment for a job for a guy who usually does short-term crisis seemed like a lot. And I said, so for 4.5 of the next 6 years, I'm going to govern and act and vote and speak about the things that I think are most important for the long term of the country. And for these 4.5 years, I'm going to act like I plan to never run for re-election. And maybe a 1.5 years out from the next election, my wife and I will sit down and pray and think and deliberate and seek counsel, then decide if we'll run again. But I want to act like I'm never running again.
Is this what you expected? I mean, as you've now been doing this for a little bit.
2.5 years. No, it's much worse.
When you say worse, what does that mean?
I knew that Washington was dysfunctional, but it's actually a good bit more dysfunctional than I thought. We don't do basic stuff. The Senate fancies itself the greatest deliberative body in the world. And once upon a time it was, but it's not true today. I'm from a town of 26,000, as you mentioned, and literally there are a dozen not-for-profit organizations in our town that I could name for you right now who have boards that deliberate much more effectively than the U.S. Senate. You sort of decide, what is our vision? What's our mission? What's the purpose of this organization? Why should it exist instead of not exist? What are the particular strategic goals we have? And then you work backwards to means to that end. How much money do we need to raise? What kind of structure should we have? What kind of customers make sense for us to pursue? What products? And then who do we hire, and how do we entrust them with fulfilling the mission of this organization? In the U.S. Senate right now, or in the Congress more broadly, we can't do basic legislative things because politics is becoming a sort of crisis zone for warring about the other and who the bad guys are. And I think the historic divide between Republicans and Democrats in the middle to the late 20th century was largely an argument about small versus medium-sized government intervention in the economy. But both Republicans and Democrats should be completely united about the national security agenda of the United States government, about the First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, the right of redress of grievances or protest. Right now, I think there's a near majority in both parties that has almost complete disinterest in the actual First Amendment. So there's a lot we should be doing to celebrate the civic meaning of America and the American idea that predates and precedes and is held at much more importance than the legislative fights we might have. And right now, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, these things are values that we're not reaffirming together. No. And it turns out if you don't do basic civics, you'll lose it.
Now, the expectation obviously then different as you go into office. You've got a young family.
I do.
Were the expectations realized in terms of what this was going to do? You're away for how many days? 5 days out of the week and then home for 2?
4.5, yeah.
Are you ready for that?
I've traveled a lot for work. So my wife and I have been married 23 years. We got married right after college, and our oldest daughter is 16. So we have 3 kids, and they span from 16 down to 6. And I've traveled a lot, and the family has traveled with me a lot. When I was fundraising for the college, I would regularly take our older 2. Our girls are 16 and 13. Our boy trails by 7, 8 years. But the girls are used to traveling with dad fundraising for the college. So we have a rhythm where we can take the family on the road. But the Senate mostly is made up of much older people. So most people are empty nesters, and lots of those folks move to D.C. Of younger folks who have kids, I'm the 5th youngest person in the Senate, but of folks just my age or a little bit older that still have kids at home, most of them have a commuting parent that's gone Monday to Friday every week, and we don't want to do it that way. I don't want to have my kids grow up without dad in their life, and I don't want to not have them in my life. So we take the kids on the road a lot, and we have a hybrid. We spend some time in D.C., but mostly we live in Nebraska, and I commute to D.C., and I take a kid with me a lot.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, let me quickly get to the book, because
Sure.
You've written a book that many people, I think, may have even been surprised the topic. And yet the topic really does dive into culture in a remarkable way by actually talking about how we're raising our children and formative experiences. Is this the reaction that you're getting from the public as they're reading the book? Is this the reaction that you expected?
Well, it's been great. I mean, I'm grateful for how much interest there's been. It went on the New York Times bestseller list the first week it came out and stayed there for a good while. It is not at all about politics. I mean, it is 100% not about politics, and it's 99% not about policy. There's a little bit of debate about K-12 schooling and this new concept of grade 13, which I think is a pretty bad idea, sort of passive assumption that everybody should do higher ed and that higher ed should start to look more like high school. So I engage that policy a little bit. But the real point of it is the fact that there's a distinction that I think is worth drawing between adolescence and perpetual adolescence. Mm-hmm. Adolescence is a concept that's really only a couple thousand years old, and I think it's a wonderful innovation in the history of civilization. Mm-hmm. Perpetual adolescence is a concept that's only about a decade or so old, and it's a terrible idea. And perpetual adolescence is to never have any clarity about what the purpose of adolescence is. Adolescence, on the other hand, is a pretty great thing, which is, I define adolescence as the 18-month to kind of 4-year window.
Safety window.
Where, you hit puberty. You become biologically an adult, and yet we don't expect our kids to have to be fully an adult. They don't have to be truly, adults are independent, children are dependent. We don't make our kids, just because they're 12 or 13 or 14, go out and form their new household structure, go to war, have to work full-time, have to quit school, have to be completely morally formed and completed because you're not, just because you hit puberty. And so having a safe space there, I make fun of safe spaces at colleges and universities, but having a safe greenhouse space for kids who are just hitting puberty and transitioning and having a lot of moral guidance from their parents and still living under somebody else's roof, wonderful. But it's a bad idea to not have an end point on adolescence.
A boundary.
And we're right now, it's hard to tell 10 and 15 and 20 and 25-year-olds apart. That's new in human history, and it's a bad idea. There's a lot of cultural drift there.
And you really saw it at Midland. I mean, and this Midland, not that was the outlier,
Right,
it's just
correct.
that's on every campus across the country.
That's right.
Midland was simply another example of another campus that was housing these kids. So
Yeah, we had 18-year-olds arriving, and it was really hard to see if they could distinguish in their belly between production and consumption. And throughout most of human history, people know the difference between those two. There's all sorts of great stuff about consumption. Sitting around a dinner table and enjoying a fine meal. There are great things in the world about consumption. But the old Christian term for it was actually recreation, not leisure, that sort of prepared you to get back to the productive environment where you get to live a life of gratitude to God by trying to serve your neighbor and be productive. We're insulating our kids from coming to understand production and work, and it's because they live at a unique time in human history. We're wealthier. Even our middle class and lower middle class folks are still the wealthiest people in all of human history. So kids don't have the compulsion of necessity to learn to work as early, and we're delaying creating a work ethic opportunity for them, and that's not good for them.
Well, Senator, this has been a quick but a wonderful time to sit down with you. Thanks so much for coming to the gathering. We have so appreciated what you've had to say.
It's been a delight. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet.